But when it comes to the planning process, I don't think there's quite really an understanding as to the actual how difficult that is from the way the system is set up at the moment, because just getting through one application right now will take you, like I've said already, months and years. But in order for that amount of houses to go through the planning system and ultimately get built, significant changes has to happen to the infrastructure of the planning system the way it is right now. And if you want to learn more about the planning process and how you can unlock value out of any property, click the link below to learn more. Okay, so the Labour Party held its annual party conference this week, and I want to run through the big things that what they went through with regards to planning. The first one is they're promising 300 new planning officers to planning departments. Now, this is the first time I've ever heard people talking about adding new officers to planning departments, and it's very, very welcome. And I'm sure people within the councils and also people that are submitting applications, this is welcome news to them, because if you submit an application now, you could be waiting weeks, months, and in some cases years to get your application determined on time, all because over the last decade or so, and even longer really, the budgets have been squeezed on planning departments to the point where they've got a skeleton staff to the point of they're practically drowning, but they're just staying at this state of just drowning, where they're not going much deeper, but they are drowning. And if they have more staff, then that is going to help them dramatically. However, what I would say is that I don't think 300 goes nearly far enough. There's over 300 councils within the UK, and if you think about, that's just under one officer per authority. Now, some authorities are much smaller than others. One officer will be felt a lot more than in a London borough, say. So to my mind, if you add that number to up maybe like 1,000, maybe you're going to be seeing a bit of a difference to people's quality of experience during the planning process, because an officer, if they're going at full tilt, I would imagine would determine anywhere between 3 to 5 applications a week. So if you add that up to a year, that's 150 to 200-ish applications a year. And there are far, 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 far more than that councils are struggling with to keep on top of their what's called a pile of applications they need to determine. So it's great news that the Labour Party are thinking about adding planning officers. It's welcome news. It's certainly in my career, it's never been mentioned before. So it's really welcome. However, what I would say is that I think the reality is that far more are needed to get anywhere near the backlog that every council is suffering with right now. The other big promise of theirs is they want to deliver over 1.5 million homes over 5 years. Now, housing delivery is one of the huge items that parties talk about when it comes to re-elections, and quite often huge numbers are thrown about, and it's these kind of sound bites that are taken to suggest like we're going to build this number of houses. But when it comes to the planning process, I don't think there's quite really an understanding as to the actual how difficult that is from the way the system is set up at the moment, because just getting through one application right now will take you, like I've said already, months and years. But in order for that amount of houses to go through the planning system and ultimately get built, significant changes has to happen to the infrastructure of the planning system the way it is right now. So in order for that amount of housing to be delivered, it essentially needs to be allocated within their local plans. So every council has planning policies, it's called the local plans, and they also have a site allocations document where they set out an area within their authority that says we're going to deliver X homes, X number of homes in the plan period, and we expect to deliver that. Now, the process that goes into that is enormous. So a local plan takes, at the moment, anywhere from 5 to 7 years to be adopted. So it's going to take 5 to 7 years for the local plan to be adopted. And then after that, the applications then have to be submitted. Like I've said, months, years. Now, the Labour Party or any party might bring in a fast track way of getting things delivered. That's been mentioned in the past, things like permissions in principle. But once you get the local plan adopted, you then want to build the housing, get the applications in. Now, the detail of that application is immense. For that amount of homes to be delivered, is huge. So the amount of work that needs to go into that, the application process will take a long time. It won't just take 13 weeks like a normal major application. It'll take significantly longer. If we're talking about that number of homes, that's just the nature of the planning system now. It will take longer. And then there's the actual cost of delivering those homes and making sure there's labour to deliver those amount of homes. It's an immense task, and 5 years to deliver that many homes. The way the system is now, I'm very dubious. I mean, one person only has to go through one application for one house right now to realise how difficult it is. Try timesing that by 1.5 million and you'll get an idea as to how difficult that task really is. So another pledge is that the Shadow Housing Minister has mentioned that the revival of strategic planning. Now, in essence, this is a beautiful idea. Strategic planning is great. That means you can plan over large areas. It's a lot clearer on where you think housing can go. Now, the big elephant in the room is that, like I said earlier, there's over 300 councils, and every council has its own boundary. Every council has its own local MPs and councillors. Every council has its own priorities. One council might be really hot on housing, and then the one next door might have a really conservative approach and has a really strong focus on conservation. It's a lot more difficult, and they focus a lot more on design. That's just two different examples, but those different pulls, those political pulls, will create an immense slowness in the system. I don't know of many instances where applications have been submitted over two authorities and there's been a coordinated, clear approach as to the decision. Normally when that happens is there's priorities being pulled in different ways, and you kind of have to make agreements with different councils across different boroughs. Now, obviously there are types of development that go through boundaries. Think of things like HS2 or large infrastructure projects. So it's definitely done, but they have a different system whereby there has their own permission process. Right now, if you were to submit a planning application over different authorities, you have to submit to each authority. So if you're submitting, you just happen to submit on the boundary of 3 or 2 authorities, you're going to have to submit applications to 2. They have their own local MPs, they have their own decision-making process, they have their own officers. So it's a great idea, strategic planning, and I think it's a really good way forward, but you're effectively addressing the fundamental issue about how the planning system operates right now to ensure a coordinated approach. I mean, if you look at London, for instance, London has 32 boroughs, but it has a Greater London Authority, which the idea is that they take a strategic approach for all of London, which they do, but the 32 boroughs have their own priorities, and it's very difficult to get a big development across 1 or 2 authorities to get the amount of housing or to get the development of infrastructure that's needed. A classic example is HS2. HS2 has got its priorities in Birmingham, but it's also had its priorities and now been shut down in Euston. So it's a very, very difficult thing to achieve. I think it's a really good thing, but you're talking about a whole upheaval of the planning system, not even the planning system, the political fabric of this country, where you tear apart all the different authorities with the idea of having a singular strategic approach to delivering housing. Like I say, I think it's a good idea, but it's an enormous task. And lastly, Keir Starmer says that he will challenge or maybe even ignore the views of local MPs that are opposing development. Now, linked to the last point, now we're talking about essentially an upheaval of the way the political system is right now, because currently right now, as he mentions, it's very localised, very true. An application really in one authority could have a very different fate to the same application in a different authority, just based on the type of members that are on the planning committee or the local ward members that might affect development in their area. So it's an interesting idea. In practice, I'm struggling to think about how this is going to work, because let's say you have a scheme for 75 homes that is objectionable from a member's point of view, and it's objectionable. At what stage and at what point would the central government step in and say, actually, no, we need these homes and this is going to happen? Essentially, they're saying that they're going to ignore or just overrule any views of those members as to the views of that application. But it could be that those views are quite important, or they're quite specific to that area. So it's going to be quite a nuanced thing where they're going to decide, when do they decide that they're going to step in and say, we want to deliver these homes, but actually the local council don't support it. it's an interesting idea, and one I understand that, you need central government to step in sometimes to deliver things that are difficult to deliver. But where is that boundary going to be drawn as to, okay, in this instance we're going to step in, and in this instance we're going to let the local decision be made? It's a difficult thing to figure out, but I'm sure they will. I'm sure they've got ideas for it. So those are the kind of 4 things. There are many more things that the Labour Party has spoken about with regards to planning. Those are the kind of 4 things that I wanted to talk about. And if you want to know more about the planning process and how you can use it to unlock the value of any property in the country, or just understand its potential or understand more about the planning process, click the link below to learn more.